The nausea hit her on a Tuesday morning, so ordinary she almost missed it. Vera had been standing at the kitchen counter, spooning coffee grounds into the filter, when her stomach turned in a slow, deliberate roll, not sharp, not urgent, just deeply, persistently wrong. She set down the spoon, pressed her palm flat against the countertop, waited for it to pass the way it always did, the way morning discomfort had always passed for her, quietly and without ceremony. It didn't pass. She leaned against the sink and looked out the window at the backyard. The maple was just starting to turn, that first blushing gold along the edges of the leaves that meant September was serious about arriving. The neighbor's dog was barking at something in the hedge. Somewhere down the street, a car door slammed. Everything was exactly as it always was, and yet Vera stood there with both hands braced on the counter and felt, with a certainty she could not explain, that something had shifted underneath her life, like a foundation settling in cold ground. She was 31 years old. She had been married to Nathan for 4 years. She was 8 weeks pregnant with their first child, and she had not yet told him. Not because she was afraid of how he would react, but because she had wanted the moment to be right. She had been waiting for the right moment for 3 weeks. She had the ultrasound photo in an envelope in her bedside table drawer, slipped between an old birthday card from her mother, and a receipt she kept meaning to throw out. She looked at it sometimes at night before Nathan came to bed. She would hold it up toward the lamp and trace the tiny comma shape of their baby with her fingertip. And she would feel something so enormous and quiet that she didn't have words for it yet. She had wanted to find the words before she told him. She was still looking for them when the nausea rolled through her again, harder this time, and she had to sit down on the kitchen floor and breathe slowly through her nose until her vision steadied. She called her doctor that afternoon. The appointment was routine, her second since confirming the pregnancy, and Dr. Okafor was reassuring in the calm, unhurried way Vera had always appreciated. Everything looked fine. The nausea was normal. The fatigue was normal. She should be eating small meals, staying hydrated, resting when she could. Any stress at home? Dr. Okafor asked, not looking up from her clipboard. Vera thought about it. No, she said. Everything's good. And it was. That was what she would think about later. It genuinely was. Nathan had been attentive and affectionate. He had been coming home at a reasonable hour, cooking dinner on Thursdays the way he used to when they were first together, texting her during the day just to check in. There had been no sign. There is never a sign, she supposed, until there suddenly is. And by then you've already spent months remembering all the normal moments and wondering what you missed. She drove home with the afternoon light slanting low across the highway and the envelope in her purse on the passenger seat. She had decided. Tonight was the night she would tell him. Nathan wasn't home when she got there. He'd texted at 4. Running late. Don't wait for me for dinner. Nothing unusual. He worked in project management for a construction company, and late meetings happened. She made herself scrambled eggs and toast, sat at the kitchen table with a book she didn't really read, and waited. He came home at 9:30. She heard the door, heard him set his keys on the hook, heard the particular sound his shoes made on the hardwood when he was tired. She went to meet him in the hallway. He looked tired, yes, but also, somehow, and this was the detail she would turn over and over in the weeks after, somehow lighter. There was a looseness around his eyes, a kind of relief that she had noticed before without registering as odd. She registered it now, and then her brain smoothed it over the way brains do, filed it under long day. He's fine, you're fine, everything is fine. Hey, he said, and kissed her on the cheek. Hey. She touched his arm. How was the Markham meeting? Good. Long. He was already moving toward the kitchen. Did you eat? Yeah, there's eggs left if you want. He said he wasn't hungry. He poured himself a glass of water and checked his phone and said he was going to shower and go to bed. She stood in the kitchen doorway and watched him go and thought, tomorrow she would tell him. The moment wasn't quite right. She wanted him present and not exhausted. She wanted him to be able to feel it properly. She reached into her purse and touched the envelope and left it there. The next morning he was up before her, unusual, and out the door by 7 with a travel mug of coffee and an apology for something he said he'd forgotten to handle at the office. She lay in bed and listened to the door close and felt the nausea come and go in slow waves and told herself she would tell him that night. She would absolutely tell him that night. She was done waiting for the right moment because there was no right moment. There was only the moment you chose. She got up. She showered. She ate a piece of toast standing over the sink. She was a coordinator at a non-profit. The kind of job that was meaningful and chronically underpaid and occasionally exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with the work itself and everything to do with the systems the work existed inside. She loved it anyway. She was good at it. She had been there for 6 years, and she knew every corner of the organization, and she was the person people called when something needed to get done and done correctly. She went to work. She had 3 meetings and a grant report deadline, and a call with a funder that ran 40 minutes over. She ate a granola bar at her desk and drank ginger tea that her colleague Bex had brought her without being asked. Bex, who was sharp and kind, and had 2 kids of her own and had looked at Vera 3 days ago with a particular knowing expression that Vera had deflected with a change of subject. At 4:15, her phone buzzed with a message from Nathan's sister Joanna. "Hey, sorry to be weird, but I wanted to check in. Is everything okay with you two?" Vera stared at the message for a long moment. She typed back, "Of course. Why?" 3 dots appeared and then disappeared. Appeared again. "No reason. Just checking. Sorry. Ignore me." She did not ignore it. She sat with it all the way home on the bus, her bag in her lap, the city sliding past the window in the gray early evening light. She sat with it through the 40-minute ride and the walk from the stop and the climb up the stairs of their building. She stood in the hallway outside their apartment and thought about Joanna, who was not a dramatic person, who did not ask questions like that without a reason, and then she put her key in the lock and opened the door. Nathan was home. She could hear him on the phone in the bedroom, his voice low and careful in a way that was not his work voice. She had heard that voice before, years ago, in a different context, with a different person, an old friend of hers who'd been hiding something from her husband, and she had recognized the particular texture of it then, the controlled quietness of someone managing 2 worlds at once, and she recognized it now. She set her bag down softly. She did not call out to him. She went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water and stood there and waited. And when the bedroom door opened and he came out and stopped short at the sight of her, she watched his face do something very small and very fast. A flicker, a recalibrations, and she knew. She didn't know everything. She didn't know the details or the timeline or the name, but she knew. "How long have you been home?" he said. "A few minutes." She set down the glass. "Who were you talking to?" "Work." She looked at him. He looked back at her. The apartment was very quiet. "Okay," she said, and she went to the bedroom to change her clothes, and she did not say anything else that night, and neither did he. And she lay awake until 2 in the morning with the envelope on the nightstand beside her, and the baby like a small bright secret still folded inside her, and she thought about all the moments she had been waiting to get right. She found out her name was Danny. Not from Nathan. Nathan, when she finally confronted him, 4 days later, on a Sunday, with the coffee going cold on the counter between them, admitted it in the fractured, self-justifying way people do when they've rehearsed 100 versions of a conversation, and none of them are working in real time. He said it had been going on for 6 months. He said it was complicated. He said, and this was the part that stayed with her, the part that felt like pressing on a bruise to check whether it still hurt, that he hadn't known how to stop. He didn't ask about her. He didn't ask if she was okay. He talked about himself for 40 minutes, and then went quiet and looked at the table, and Vera sat across from him with her hands folded in her lap and felt something vast and cold settle into the space where their marriage had been. She told him she was pregnant on a Sunday morning in their kitchen, 8 weeks and 2 days. The look on his face was the worst thing she had ever seen. Not bad in the way of cruelty. Nathan was not, she thought, a cruel person, which somehow made it worse, but bad in the way of someone who has just understood the full weight of what they've done. His eyes went wet. He said her name. He reached across the table and she moved her hands into her lap before he could touch them. "Don't," she said quietly. She told him she needed him to leave for a few days. He did. He went to his brother's place in Oshawa, and Vera called her mother that evening, and sat on the couch, and cried in the way that isn't dignified, in the ugly, gulping way that you only do when you're completely alone, or with someone who loves you completely. And her mother said almost nothing. Just, "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm right here," and that was enough. Her mother's name was June, and she drove up from Guelph the next day with a casserole and her reading glasses, and the particular brand of quiet competence that Vera had been grateful for her entire life. June did not offer opinions unless asked. She did not say, "I never trusted him," or "you're better off," or any of the things people say that are meant to comfort, and instead feel like being handed a drink after a car accident. She made tea. She sat beside Vera on the couch. She asked what Vera needed, and then she went and got it. What Vera needed, she discovered, was surprisingly practical. She needed to know that she could do this. She needed to know that the numbers worked, the mat leave, the daycare costs, the apartment, the salary. She needed to understand what her life looked like on the other side of this, because the only way she could make herself move through the days was to have some shape to move toward. June helped her with the spreadsheet. They sat at the kitchen table with Vera's laptop and her mother's reading glasses and went through everything carefully and methodically. And by the end of the evening, Vera had a document saved on her desktop called Plan. And it was terrifying and also somehow steadying. It existed, it was hers. She had made it herself. Nathan called twice. She answered the second time and told him she didn't want to make any decisions yet, that she needed space to think. He said he understood. He said he was sorry. She believed him and it didn't change anything. She was 12 weeks when she went back to the doctor. Everything still looked fine. The baby was growing, the nausea was starting to ease. Dr. Okafor handed her the new ultrasound printout across the desk, and Vera looked at it for a long moment. The shape was clearer now, unmistakably a person beginning to be a person, and felt the enormous quiet thing again, the thing she still didn't have words for, except now it lived alongside something sharper and harder, a kind of fierce protectiveness that she hadn't expected to arrive this early. She folded the photo carefully and put it in her coat pocket. She walked out into the October air, the leaves everywhere now, red and gold, and the brilliant orange that only happened for about 10 days in Ontario before the gray moved in. She stood on the sidewalk outside the clinic and breathed. She thought about June. She thought about the spreadsheet on her laptop. She thought about the small person in the ultrasound photo. Then she walked to the parking lot, got in her car, and drove to her next appointment. His name was Emmett. She had known him for 2 years. Not well, not then, but well enough. He was a volunteer coordinator at the literacy organization that partnered with her nonprofit, and they had been in the same meetings a dozen times, had shared a table at a sector conference the previous spring, had exchanged the kind of easy, collegial warmth that exists between people who work adjacent to the same cause without ever quite stepping into each other's actual lives. He was the one who called her in November, on behalf of the partnership, to talk about a joint project they'd been vaguely planning since the summer. It was a professional call. She was in her office with the door closed, 14 weeks pregnant, the waistband of her pants quietly losing the argument, and she was fine. She had been fine for weeks now. A functional kind of fine that was not the same as healed, but was the same as moving. And they talked for 20 minutes about budgets and timelines, and then, because there was a small pause at the end, and she was not the kind of person who let pauses sit, she said, "How are things on your end generally? It's been a strange year." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yeah, strange year is exactly right." Something in his voice. She didn't ask, but she heard it. They started talking more after that. Not often, and not about anything personal at first. Just the rhythm of the partnership work. Emails that were slightly warmer than they needed to be. A phone call here and there that ran a few minutes longer than strictly necessary. She told herself it was professional. She told herself she was not in any condition to be starting anything. Which was true. Which she genuinely believed. In December, they ran into each other at a sector event, at a venue in Kensington Market, a holiday gathering, crowded and too warm, the kind of event where you spend most of your time navigating the room. She was visibly pregnant by then. He saw her across the room and came over immediately and said, with such uncalculated directness that she almost laughed, "You look like you could use somewhere to sit down." She said, "I've been looking for an excuse to leave for 40 minutes. He said, "I know a good bakery 2 blocks from here that's open late." They walked there in the cold, her scarf wrapped twice around her neck and her breath making small clouds in the December air. And they sat in the warm bakery for an hour and a half and talked. Really talked. The kind of conversation that doesn't feel like it's going anywhere particular, but somehow covers a lot of ground. He had been through something that year too, he told her. A relationship that had ended badly. Someone he'd trusted who had made choices he hadn't seen coming. He said it without bitterness, which she noticed. Just plainly, factually, the way you talk about something, when you've had a few months to stop being in the thick of it. She told him about the pregnancy. She didn't tell him about Nathan. Not the full story, not yet. But she said she was going through it on her own, and he nodded without making her explain, and he asked if she had good people around her, and she said yes, she did. She had her mother, she had Bex, she had a plan. He smiled at that. "A plan," he said. "Good." She walked home in the dark and the cold, and she thought about that smile for much longer than she intended to. January was hard. The partnership paperwork hit a wall, and the weather hit the city like a punishment, and Vera hit the stage of pregnancy, where she was visibly, unmistakably, undeniably pregnant, and also perpetually exhausted in a way that no amount of sleep addressed. She took the bus everywhere now, because parking downtown was impossible, and driving tired felt reckless, and she sat on the bus with her coat open, because she was always slightly overheated, and watched the frozen city go by and thought about all the things she hadn't done yet. The nursery, the birth plan, the conversation with HR, the conversation with Nathan, which they still hadn't fully had, which kept getting scheduled and rescheduled, and which she kept finding reasons to defer, because as long as it remained unfinished, she didn't have to decide what finished looked like. She called Joanna once, in January. She wasn't sure why, maybe because Joanna had been the first one to reach out, however obliquely, back in September. They talked for an hour. Joanna cried. She said she had suspected for longer than she wanted to admit and hadn't known what to do. Vera told her she didn't blame her. She meant it. She set up the crib on a Sunday afternoon in February with the help of her upstairs neighbor, a retired teacher named Mr. Kowalski, who had knocked on her door in November with an extra bag of salt for the front steps and had since become an unexpected and invaluable fixture in her life. He was 68 and patient and good with tools, and he brought her tea without being asked, which seemed to be the defining quality of the people she was grateful for. The crib went together in an hour. She stood in the doorway of the small room that had been a home office and was now, unmistakably, a nursery, and she looked at the white crib against the soft yellow wall that she and June had painted on Thanksgiving weekend, and she felt something shift again. Not like that first shift in the kitchen, the one that had felt like a foundation moving, but like something that had been braced for impact finally, cautiously, beginning to open. Emmett asked her to coffee in March. He framed it as a meeting. There was genuinely something to discuss about the spring project, but he also said, at the end of the text, "And I just want to see how you're doing, if that's okay." She stared at that last clause for an unreasonable amount of time. Then she said yes. She was 7 months pregnant at a corner table in a coffee shop on College Street, and she sat across from him and watched him talk, and felt something warm and completely inconvenient move through her chest, and she thought, this is not the time for this. This is genuinely, objectively not the time for this. But it was also the first time in months that she had sat across from someone and felt, simply, comfortable. Not managed, not processed, not like she was performing okayness. Just comfortable, in the plain everyday sense of the word, in the way you feel comfortable with someone when you fit into each other's conversational rhythms without having to think about it. He asked about the birth plan, not awkwardly, genuinely, the way someone asks when they actually want to know. She told him about the midwife team and the hospital preference, and the bag she was halfway through packing. He listened. He asked a few questions. He did not make her feel like the pregnancy was something to navigate around. When they said goodbye on the sidewalk, he hugged her, carefully around the considerable geography of her belly, and said, "You've got this, Vera." She walked to the bus stop and sat down on the bench, and her eyes went hot all at once, startlingly, and she blinked it back and thought, "Don't do that. You are 7 months pregnant and sitting at a bus stop on College Street, and this is not the place." But she also thought, when was the last time someone had said that to her and she had actually believed them? She believed him. The baby came on a Tuesday in April. Vera had been at work. She was still working, part-time, from home mostly, because work made her feel like herself, and the alternative was sitting alone in the apartment waiting, when the cramp started, mild at first, and then, over the course of 2 hours, unmistakably not mild. She called the midwife. She called June. She called Bex, who was her backup support person, and who arrived at the apartment within 20 minutes, with a bag she had apparently been pre-packed since February, which Vera found so deeply touching she cried, which was inconvenient because she was also in labor. June drove up from Guelph in record time and was there by 6. Labor was long and hard, and Vera did not handle it with the serene dignity she had vaguely imagined. She was loud. She was ungracious. She said several things she would later categorize as forgivable under the circumstances. And then at 2:17 in the morning, a baby was put in her arms, small and red-faced and startlingly loud herself. And everything that had been loud in Vera's head went very quiet. "Hi," Vera whispered. "Hi there." June was crying. Bex was crying. The midwife was writing something down and trying to pretend she wasn't also a little teary. Vera looked at her daughter. Her daughter looked back at her, or looked in her general direction, newborns not being famous for their visual precision, and Vera felt the enormous quiet thing for the third time, and this time she had a word for it. It was love, but it was also something harder and brighter than love. It was certainty. After months of not knowing what shape anything was going to take, here was a shape. Here was a person. Here was something that was absolutely undeniably hers. She named her Clara. The first weeks were what they were. Sleep deprivation is its own kind of weather system. Vera moved through those early days in a fog that was occasionally illuminated by moments of such sharp beauty. Clara sleeping on her chest, Clara's hand curled around her finger, Clara making the small sounds she made when she was about to wake up, that Vera would sometimes just stand and hold her and breathe and feel like the luckiest and most wrecked person on earth simultaneously. Nathan came to the hospital. She had not told him she was in labor. That felt like a decision she hadn't been ready to make. But she called him the morning after, when Clara was 8 hours old. He came the same afternoon. He stood at the edge of the room in the particular posture of someone who doesn't know how much space they're allowed to take up, and he looked at his daughter, and he cried. And Vera felt something complicated and distant that she didn't try to name. They had the conversation finally in May. A real one, civil and hard and necessary. They agreed on what was fair. Nathan was going to be in Clara's life that had never been in question whatever else had happened, and they were going to figure out how to make that work. It would not be simple, it would not be fast, but they were both willing to try, and Vera had decided that willing to try was enough to start with. She was 31 years old. She had a daughter who was 3 weeks old, and who smelled like something she had no language for, something warm and specific to Clara and only Clara. She had a mother who drove up every Thursday. She had Bex, who had turned out to be the kind of friend you only fully understand in a crisis. She had Mr. Kowalski, who had built a small shelf unit for the nursery and declined payment. She had a plan, still open, still evolving, updated on the laptop as circumstances changed. And she had Emmett, who texted her when Clara was 5 days old to say he hoped she was doing okay and that he wasn't expecting a reply. Just wanted her to know he was thinking about her. She read it at 3 in the morning with Clara asleep on her chest and the apartment dark and quiet around them, and she typed back, "She's here. She's perfect. I'm doing better than I thought." He replied a few hours later, "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Summer came. Clara grew in the fast, bewildering way babies grow, filling out her newborn clothes and then outgrowing them before Vera had properly registered that they fit. The city opened up as it did every June. The patios, the park, the particular smell of the lake when the wind came off the water. Vera bought a carrier and wore Clara on her chest and walked for hours through the neighborhood, the baby sleeping against her heartbeat. And she felt slowly and then all at once like herself again. Not the same self, a different version, one that knew more, had fewer certainties, and was surprised to find that this was not the frightening thing she had expected it to be. She and Emmett had coffee again in June, and then again in July, and somewhere between July and August, the thing that had been inconvenient and carefully not named became something she couldn't reasonably pretend wasn't happening. And one evening after dinner on her building's rooftop patio, Clara in the carrier, the city spread out below them in the August dusk. He told her that he wanted to be honest with her, that he had wanted to be honest with her for a while, but he hadn't wanted to add anything complicated to an already complicated year. She said, "It's August." He said, "I know." She said, "I think the complicated year is probably just my life now." He smiled. "Okay," he said. "Then honestly, I care about you. I've cared about you for a long time, and I'm not asking for anything. I just didn't want to keep not saying it." Clara made a small sound against her chest, the particular soft sound she made when she was about to wake up. Vera looked at her daughter, and then she looked at Emmett, and she thought about certainty, about how she had thought she'd lost it, thought the knowledge of what her life was going to be had been taken from her in a kitchen on a Sunday morning with the coffee going cold. And she thought about how strange it was, how surprising, that certainty could come back to you. Not in the way it had been before, not in the neat shape of a plan you'd made when you were younger and less seasoned, but in a different form, quieter. More grounded, more earned. "Okay," she said. Clara opened her eyes. Vera held her a little tighter. The city went on below them, gold in the late summer light, and Vera stood on that rooftop with her daughter on her chest and let herself believe in what came next.